What if I told you that a single rumor, whispered decades ago, still sits at the very heart of the British monarchy, like a time bomb waiting to go off? What if I told you that the man the world knows as Prince Harry has spent his entire life silently wondering whether the person he calls his father is, in fact, a stranger? That is not just speculation. It's the shadow that Meghan Markle claims has haunted her husband every single day of his life. And tonight, she says, she's finally ready to break her silence. Imagine the first 5 seconds of this video hitting you like a thunderclap. The music swells, the camera zooms in, and Meghan's trembling voice echoes in the background. I can't hide it anymore. It destroys him every day. You stop scrolling. You lean in. Because deep down you know this isn't just another celebrity headline. This is about identity. It's about family. It's about betrayal. And above all, it's about the kind of secrets that can shake not just a marriage, but an empire. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. But let's pause for a second. Why does this story matter now? Why is Meghan choosing this exact moment to say, it's time? I'll tell you everything. The answer lies not just in the monarchy's fragile state after Queen Elizabeth's death, nor in the never-ending battle between Harry, Meghan, and the institution that raised him. The timing is everything. Every word spoken, every silence kept, has been part of a larger game, one that Meghan and Harry are now daring to play in full view of the world. Think about it. For years, Harry has been the spare, the second son, the one constantly measured against William, the future king. And in the middle of that relentless comparison has always been the unspoken question: does Harry even belong in the House of Windsor? Not in terms of duty or decorum, but in blood. Imagine carrying that question in your bones every single day of your life, while the world watches your every move. Let me ask you directly, what would that do to you? If you grew up knowing that millions whispered behind your back, is he even Charles's son? Would you laugh it off? Would you fight to prove them wrong? Or would you, like Harry, bury it deep, pretending it doesn't matter, while it eats you alive from the inside? From the outside, Harry's life looked like a fairy tale. The castles, the polo matches, the luxury, the cameras. But what people didn't see were the cracks behind the smiles. The way paparazzi headlines mocked his looks, pointing out that he looked nothing like his father. The cruel nicknames, the endless comparisons to James Hewitt, the man forever linked to Princess Diana in scandal. It was easy gossip for the tabloids. But for Harry, it was a knife that kept twisting deeper every time it came up. And here's where Meghan's role changes everything. Because she isn't just repeating what the tabloids have said. She's confessing what she's seen firsthand. The way this rumor has broken Harry down in private. She claims it's destroyed him every day. Every day? Think about the weight of that. Imagine waking up beside the man you love, seeing him put on a brave face for the world, while knowing that inside, he's crumbling under the suspicion that he doesn't belong to the very family that defines him. But Meghan's decision to break the silence isn't just about Harry's pain. It's about Archie. It's about Lilibet. It's about the future. Because if Harry is living in the shadow of doubt, what does that mean for his children? Meghan knows the press will never let it go. The whispers of paternity won't stop at Harry. They'll extend to his son, his daughter, his bloodline. And if Meghan has learned anything in her battle with the press, it's this: silence doesn't protect you. Silence only feeds the wolves. So she chose not to be silent anymore. But don't misunderstand. This isn't just Meghan venting. It's calculated. It's risky. And it's explosive. Because the royal family has spent decades mastering the art of silence. Never complain, never explain. That's their golden rule. But Meghan? Meghan has always been an outsider to that rule. And tonight, she is deliberately breaking it, knowing full well the consequences. You might be wondering, what exactly did she say? What did she confess that makes this moment so earth-shattering? Did she confirm the rumors? Did she deny them? Or did she do something far more powerful? Pull back the curtain just enough to let us glimpse the truth without fully stating it? That, right there, is where the genius lies. Because in storytelling, sometimes the power isn't in the answer. It's in the question that never leaves your mind. Let me take you inside the palace walls for a moment. Behind those gilded doors, every whisper is amplified, every rumor is magnified. Staff members talk, courtiers speculate. Even other royals, behind closed doors, may drop hints that fuel the fire. Meghan knows this. She's lived it. And when she says Harry is haunted by whispers, she isn't talking about tabloids alone. She's talking about whispers that start from within the family's own circle, the whispers that cut the deepest. And here's the cruel irony. The one person who might have put these rumors to rest forever, Princess Diana, isn't here to do it. Or is she? Meghan hints at things Diana left behind. Letters, notes, conversations that suggest even she was tormented by what people said about Harry's true paternity. Imagine being a mother, carrying that weight, and knowing that one day your son might stumble across those words. This is why Meghan's timing is so chilling. Because by speaking now, she's not only addressing Harry's pain, she's reigniting the fire of speculation in a world desperate for royal scandal. She's feeding the question that Buckingham Palace has tried to bury for decades. And she's doing it while the monarchy is more vulnerable than ever. But here's where it gets even more shocking. Meghan's confession isn't just about Harry's pain. It's about the institution's fear. Because if Harry's identity were ever publicly proven to be in question, what happens to the royal family's image? Their lineage? Their power? Blood is everything in monarchy. It's the one thing that gives them legitimacy. Take that away, and the entire foundation trembles. And Meghan knows that. Which means by speaking these words, she's not just revealing Harry's torment. She's threatening the monarchy itself. Now, you might think this is just another scandal story. But pause and think about how different this is from every other royal controversy we've seen. This isn't about who wore what dress, or who was snubbed at a balcony appearance. This is about identity. This is about whether one of the most famous men in the world truly belongs to the family that raised him. And the person bringing this to light isn't a journalist, or a biographer, or an anonymous source. It's his wife. It's Meghan. That's why this moment matters. That's why the world is watching. Because the one person who knows Harry best, the one person who sees him at his most vulnerable, is standing before the world and saying, "I can't hide it anymore." But what exactly does she mean by that? Is she about to reveal something she and Harry have uncovered? Is she hinting that Harry himself has asked the forbidden question, the one that terrifies the palace? Am I really Charles's son? Or is she speaking more emotionally, exposing the raw truth that Harry's life has been poisoned by doubt, whether or not the rumors are true? That's the cliffhanger hanging over this entire story. And it's the reason you can't look away. Because the deeper we dig, the more we realize this isn't just about Harry's bloodline. It's about his soul. And here's where we must go next. Into Harry's childhood, into the whispers that followed him in school, in the army, even in his own home. Because the truth Meghan is pointing to didn't start today. It didn't even start with her. It started long before she ever entered the story. And it began with a single cruel rumor that refused to die. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the cruelest wounds aren't the ones dealt by enemies, but by whispers that follow you everywhere you go? What if the pain doesn't come from a punch or a headline, but from the look in someone's eyes when they wonder whether you belong? That's the shadow that hovered over Prince Harry's entire childhood, the shadow of doubt, rumor, and cruel speculation. And the weight of those whispers shaped the man he became. Harry wasn't just any boy. He was a royal child, born into the most photographed, scrutinized family on earth. But unlike William, the golden heir, Harry's place in the world was always precarious. He was the spare, the one who mattered, but not quite as much. And into that already vulnerable role came the whispers. Does he even belong? Let's step back. Picture a young Harry at school, surrounded by classmates who had read the tabloids, who had seen the photos splashed across front pages comparing his features to James Hewitt, the man forever linked to Princess Diana and scandal. Imagine being a teenager and overhearing classmates whisper about whether the man you call dad might not actually be your father. Think about it. Children can be cruel. Yes, but children who are armed with the vicious headlines of the British press? That's another level entirely. Harry didn't just face normal schoolyard teasing. He carried the weight of national gossip into every classroom he walked into. Now pause. What would you do if you were in his shoes? Would you confront the rumors head-on? Would you laugh them off? Or would you bury them deep inside, pretending they don't hurt, while each whisper carves a little deeper into your sense of self? Because here's the truth. Harry couldn't escape it. Not at Eton, not in the army, not even in his own home. The British press had given him a cruel nickname that stuck for years, the Bastard Prince. They mocked his fiery red hair, his cheeky grin, his every gesture, always tying it back to Hewitt. And every time, the palace stayed silent. Never complain, never explain. That was the rule. But silence didn't protect Harry. Silence only made the whispers louder. And then there were the photographs. Tabloids would plaster pictures of Harry side by side with James Hewitt, highlighting the similarities, the hair, the jawline, the eyes. It became a cruel national pastime. Spot the difference, or rather, spot the resemblance. The comparison wasn't just casual. It was invasive, relentless, designed to humiliate. Now imagine the effect on a boy. Every time Harry looked in the mirror, was he just seeing his own face? Or was he searching for proof of the man who raised him? Was Charles's face in his reflection? Or Hewitt's? Here's where Meghan's revelation becomes even more haunting. Because she says Harry carries this torment every day. Not occasionally. Not when the press brings it up. Every day? That means this isn't just a rumor. It's a wound that never healed. And if we're honest, the palace didn't make it easier. While William was groomed for kingship, Harry often felt like an afterthought. Public events made the differences clear. William standing tall beside Charles, Harry slightly to the side, slightly behind. The optics were everything. And whether intentional or not, those optics reinforced the whispers. But the cruelest part? The rumors didn't just come from outside. They seeped inside the palace walls. Staff whispered. Courtiers joked. And Harry, no matter how hard he tried to ignore it, couldn't escape the sense that even some inside his own home wondered if he belonged. Let's pause again. Ask yourself, how would you grow up in that environment? Could you ever feel secure? Could you ever trust love when every glance, every silence might carry suspicion? Harry wasn't just fighting the press. He was fighting the invisible weight of doubt in his own house. And that weight changed him. It made him rebellious. It made him reckless. We all remember the headlines, the wild parties, the Nazi costume scandal, the drunken nights in Las Vegas. People said Harry was just the party prince, a carefree rogue. But beneath that exterior was a young man trying to drown out the whispers with laughter, with alcohol, with rebellion. If he was going to be the outsider anyway, why not embrace it? But here's the twist. Beneath the rebellion was pain. Meghan says Harry never truly escaped it. And when she came into his life, she saw it firsthand. She saw the way certain headlines cut him more deeply than others. She saw the way jokes about Hewitt weren't just offensive, they were devastating. And yet, Harry rarely talked about it. Because what could he say? How do you confront a rumor when the only way to disprove it, the only way to know the truth, was a DNA test that would never be allowed? That's the cruelest irony. The one thing that could set him free was forbidden. Because in the monarchy, some questions are never asked. And so Harry carried the weight. The weight of whispers. The weight of doubt. The weight of silence. Every smile he gave the cameras. Every laugh he forced at public events. Behind it all, the same question echoed. Do I really belong? But the cruelest rumor of all, it didn't come from outside the palace walls. It came from within. And what Harry discovered next would change everything. What if the whispers weren't just outside in the tabloids, but inside the very palace halls you were forced to call home? What if every corridor, every gilded chamber, carried echoes of doubt about who you really were? That's the part of the story Meghan points to when she says Harry was haunted. It wasn't just the headlines. It was the staff, the courtiers, the insiders who, in hushed tones, repeated the same cruel suggestion. Harry didn't belong. Picture it. Behind the shimmering facade of Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace, life wasn't all tiaras and polished silver. There were kitchens buzzing with gossip. There were footmen and assistants whispering behind closed doors. These weren't outsiders speculating. They were insiders, living under the same roof, bound by the same rules of silence. And yet, they couldn't resist fueling the same fire the tabloids thrived on. It's ironic, isn't it? A monarchy that prides itself on tradition and loyalty is often riddled with backstairs chatter. And in Harry's case, that chatter was merciless. Meghan recalls hearing stories from Harry about whispers he couldn't avoid, even in the place that was supposed to be his sanctuary. Staff members joking about ginger jeans. Courtiers raising eyebrows when Harry passed by. It wasn't just rumor, it was ridicule. And ridicule inside your own home cuts deeper than any headline. Think about it. Imagine you're a child in a palace, hearing people who are supposed to serve your family snicker about whether you really belong to that family. Wouldn't that feel like betrayal? Wouldn't it make you question every look, every smile, every gesture? And then there were the photos. Not the glossy portraits for official releases, but the candid shots insiders would reference. The way they'd quietly compare Harry's face to James Hewitt's. The way they'd mention that infamous resemblance when they thought no one was listening. But Harry was always listening. Children always hear more than adults think. And those whispers stuck. Here's where Meghan's perspective matters. Because she came into this world later, as an adult, and she could see the lingering scars. She could see how certain palace events triggered Harry's unease. She could see how every time a journalist brought up Hewitt, Harry's face changed. Not angry, not defensive, but wounded. That wound, Meghan says, was reopened time and again not just by the press, but by palace voices. Now let's dig deeper. Why would people inside the palace even feed this rumor? Was it malice? Was it jealousy? Or was it something darker? An institution quietly preparing for the possibility that the rumor might one day explode? Think about it. If enough staff members repeated the story, it almost gave it legitimacy, as if the palace itself was complicit in keeping the doubt alive. And here's where it becomes chilling. Because the whispers weren't just casual gossip, they became part of the culture. A culture where silence on the official level coexisted with rumor at the unofficial one. Never complain, never explain on the surface, but did you see the resemblance? Behind the scenes. Harry was living in a paradox. His identity was both protected and undermined by the same institution. Imagine growing up in that contradiction. The world treats you like royalty, but your own walls betray you. That duality became Harry's reality, and it shaped his relationship with the monarchy forever. But Meghan says it went even further. Because at some point, it wasn't just whispers. It was insinuation. She recalls Harry telling her about palace insiders who dropped comments that cut too close. The kind of comments disguised as jokes, but laced with cruelty. You don't look much like Charles today, do you? A smirk, a chuckle, a dagger wrapped in laughter. That's the kind of cruelty that leaves a scar. And those scars, Meghan suggests, followed Harry everywhere. Into adulthood, into his relationships, into his very sense of who he was. Now pause for a second. Put yourself in his place. You're already battling tabloids calling you illegitimate. And then you realize the whispers exist inside your own home. Where do you go for safety? Who do you trust? Can you ever fully relax when the very people tasked with protecting your family are also the ones questioning your bloodline? And then came the photographs that pushed the whispers to a fever pitch. Side-by-side comparisons in tabloids didn't just circulate outside. They found their way into palace chatter. Look at that one, someone would say, pointing at a candid, spitting image, isn't he? The cruel irony? The comparison was always with Hewitt, not Charles. That's when Harry began to notice something even more painful. The palace never corrected the rumors. They never issued denials. They never put their foot down and said, "This is unacceptable." Silence reigned. But silence, in this case, wasn't neutral. It was damning. Because every time the palace refused to comment, the whispers grew louder. Meghan says Harry carried that silence like a weight on his shoulders. He knew the palace's refusal to defend him wasn't just strategy, it was indifference, maybe even complicity. And for a young man already struggling to find his place, that silence screamed louder than any headline. And then came the photograph Meghan describes as the moment that broke him. A photo so powerful, so undeniable, that even Harry couldn't shake the resemblance it suggested. This wasn't just another tabloid mashup. This was the image that made the whispers impossible to ignore. Because sometimes a picture doesn't just speak 1,000 words. It screams them. And that single photo would become the turning point in Harry's torment. What if one image had the power to shatter the fragile line between rumor and reality? What if a single photograph, frozen in time, could whisper louder than 1,000 headlines? That's what Meghan Markle describes when she says Harry's torment reached a breaking point. Because for years, whispers could be brushed aside as idle gossip. But then came the photo, the one that made denial impossible, the one that forced Harry to stare directly at the question he had avoided all his life. Imagine this moment. A glossy magazine splashes it across its cover. Tabloids run it side by side with another picture, not of Prince Charles, but of James Hewitt. The comparison is ruthless. Harry, in his early 20s, with his bright ginger hair, his angled jawline, his mischievous smile. Beside him, a younger Hewitt, in uniform, carrying the same coloring, the same features. The resemblance is uncanny. So uncanny that even those who had laughed off the rumors before found themselves pausing, looking, wondering. Now ask yourself, what would it feel like to see your own face turned into evidence? To see your reflection used as proof that you don't belong to the man who raised you? It's not just speculation anymore. It's a visual accusation. And Harry couldn't escape it. Every newsstand he passed, every glance at a magazine rack. There it was, his face, side by side with Hewitt's. Meghan recalls how deeply this cut him. Because this wasn't just about resemblance. This was about identity. This was about a young man forced to ask, who am I, really? It's one thing to hear whispers. It's another thing entirely to see them plastered in print, validated by imagery. Images have power. They bypass logic. They play on instinct. And instinct told the public that Harry and Hewitt looked too much alike for coincidence. But here's where the story twists. Because the timing of Hewitt's relationship with Diana doesn't actually line up with Harry's birth. By the calendar, by the dates, it shouldn't be possible. Hewitt himself has repeatedly denied being Harry's father. And yet, facts don't always silence suspicion. In fact, sometimes they inflame it. Because when people want to believe a rumor, they'll bend the truth to fit the narrative. That's what happened here. The photo became stronger than the facts. The whispers grew louder. And Harry? Harry withdrew deeper into himself. Let me ask you directly. Have you ever had someone doubt your identity? Have you ever felt like you had to prove who you are, even when the truth should be obvious? Multiply that by 1,000, and you have Harry's reality. He wasn't just proving himself to the world. He was proving himself to the monarchy, to the institution, to his own bloodline. And a photo like that made the task feel impossible. Think of the cruelty of it. Charles remained silent. The palace refused to address it. The media feasted on it. And Harry stood alone, his very existence reduced to a side-by-side comparison. Meghan says that was the moment she realized how broken he was by all this. Because a man can laugh off words. He can shrug off jokes. But when the evidence feels like it's staring back at him in the mirror, how does he escape? And then came the jokes. Late-night comedians, talk show hosts, even political cartoons, they all used that photo as ammunition. Harry became a punchline. His life, his pain, turned into entertainment. Imagine the humiliation. You can fight headlines. You can even fight whispers. But how do you fight laughter? How do you fight when the whole world turns you into a meme before memes even existed? But here's the most tragic part. The photo didn't just make Harry question his father. It made him question his mother. Princess Diana, the woman he adored, the woman he lost far too soon, was dragged into the scandal again and again. Every time the photo appeared, her name was tied to it. Her choices, her love life, her pain. And for Harry, that was unbearable. His grief for his mother was already immense. Now, it was tainted by suspicion. Meghan recalls Harry's words. It's like they won't let her rest. They won't let me rest. That's the torment. That's the wound that photo ripped wide open. And here's where the story takes another cruel turn. Because in a monarchy obsessed with image, a photo like that doesn't just haunt the individual, it haunts the institution. Every resemblance between Harry and Hewitt wasn't just gossip. It was a threat to the crown's legitimacy, its narrative, its control. Bloodlines matter in monarchies more than anything else. And a photo that suggests a fracture in that bloodline? That's dynamite. Yet the palace never addressed it. Not once. Not publicly. Not privately. Harry waited for defense that never came. For reassurance that never arrived. The silence was deafening. And in that silence, the whispers grew into roars. But here's where irony creeps in. Because for all the talk of resemblance, for all the obsession with that one photo, Harry shares traits with Charles too. The mannerisms, the expressions, the posture. But those similarities never made headlines. Because they weren't scandalous. They didn't sell papers. And that's the tragedy of it. The world didn't want the truth. They wanted the story. They wanted the scandal. And Harry became its unwilling centerpiece. Now, let's circle back to Meghan. She describes sitting with Harry, watching him wrestle with the pain of that photo. She saw the way his jaw tightened. She saw the way his eyes clouded over, and she realized something chilling. The world wasn't just questioning Harry's paternity. They were questioning his very humanity. They weren't treating him like a man with feelings. They were treating him like a character in a soap opera. And that's when Harry began to ask the forbidden question. The question no one dared say out loud. The question that terrified the monarchy more than any scandal ever could. Why not take a DNA test? Those words, whispered in private, changed everything. Because if a photo could raise questions, only blood could answer them. What if the one thing that could set you free was the very thing you were forbidden to do? What if the answer to your torment, the proof that could silence a lifetime of whispers, was locked away behind rules you could never break? That was Harry's reality when the question of DNA began to surface. Because in a world where lineage is everything, blood is not just biology, it's destiny. And destiny, in the royal family, is never left to chance. Think about it. For decades, the rumors swirled. For decades, the photos circulated. For decades, Harry carried the pain of suspicion in silence. But there's a simple solution, isn't there? A test. A swab. Science. Cold, hard evidence that could once and for all declare the truth. And yet, it never happened. Why? Because in the monarchy, some truths are too dangerous. Let's be clear. A DNA test would have been easy, private, definitive. One moment of clarity could have ended decades of torment. But the monarchy isn't built on clarity. It's built on mystery, tradition, and silence. The golden rule, never complain, never explain, isn't just about avoiding gossip. It's about survival. Because the moment you start answering questions, the floodgates open. And in Harry's case, one answer could unravel everything. Imagine the stakes. If a test proved Charles was his father, the rumors would finally die. The press would lose their favorite weapon. Harry could live in peace. But if the opposite happened, if the test proved Charles wasn't his biological father, the monarchy would face its greatest crisis in modern history. A prince with no blood tie to the crown. A line of succession thrown into chaos. A family dynasty stained forever. Do you see the danger? The monarchy couldn't afford to take that risk. And so, the whispers continued. But here's the heartbreaking part. Meghan reveals that Harry himself wrestled with the idea. He wanted to know. He needed to know. But he also feared what the answer might mean. Not just for him, but for the world. Because if the truth came out, it wouldn't just destroy him. It would destroy his father, his brother, his mother's legacy, the monarchy itself. Let me ask you directly, would you want to know? If your entire life had been built on a question mark, would you dare to chase the answer? Or would you live with the doubt, fearing that certainty might cost you everything? Harry's torment wasn't just about not knowing. It was about being trapped in an impossible choice. Silence meant living with pain. Truth meant risking everything. Either way, he lost. Now picture the private conversations between Meghan and Harry. Meghan, desperate to help him heal, urging him to find out. Why not take the test? She asked. Why not free yourself from the weight of this? But Harry resisted. Not because he didn't want answers, but because he feared them. He feared that one vial of blood could destroy not only his life, but the monarchy's illusion of stability. And here's the cruelest irony. Harry, a man who wanted nothing more than to escape the institution, was protecting it by not knowing. His silence was a shield for the very monarchy that wounded him. But Meghan saw the truth. She saw how the unanswered question ate away at him. She saw the way he clenched his fists when the topic came up. She saw the way his eyes darkened when Hewitt's name was mentioned. It wasn't just curiosity, it was torment. A torment that DNA could have solved. A torment Harry was never allowed to end. And let's not forget the historical context. Royal families have always avoided paternity questions. For centuries, rumors have swirled around kings and queens, around heirs and bastards. But bloodlines are sacred. They are the lifeblood of monarchy. To question them is to question the very foundation of power. That's why no royal in history has ever willingly submitted to such a test. Because once you start, where do you stop? And so the whispers remained. Meghan describes it as a prison. A gilded cage where Harry carried the keys, but was too afraid to use them. Science could have given him freedom, but the crown demanded silence. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Because Meghan suggests that Harry's refusal wasn't entirely his own choice. She hints at pressure, at palace voices warning him never to consider it, at subtle threats disguised as advice. Some things are better left alone. Don't give them more ammunition. Think of what it would do to your family. Words that weren't just caution, they were commands. Imagine the weight of that. A young man, desperate for truth, told by the very institution that raised him to bury the question forever. That's not protection. That's control. And here's where the irony deepens. Because the palace's silence, their refusal to even entertain the idea of DNA, only fueled the rumors. By saying nothing, they said everything. By forbidding the test, they made the whispers louder. It was a strategy that backfired. But for Harry, it wasn't just strategy. It was personal. He had to live with the knowledge that the one thing that could free him was the one thing he could never have. And Meghan? She had to watch him crumble under the weight of that impossible reality. So here's the cliffhanger. Meghan says Harry once told her, in a moment of raw vulnerability, "If I knew the truth, I might not survive it." What did he mean by that? Was he afraid of losing Charles as a father figure? Was he afraid of losing his place in the monarchy? Or was he afraid of losing himself? Because sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes the truth destroys you. And what Meghan revealed next proved that Harry's pain wasn't just about a test. It was about the man who raised him and the man who might not be his father. What if the man you called Dad was both your anchor and your greatest source of doubt? What if every tender moment was shadowed by a question you could never ask out loud? That's the reality Meghan Markle paints when she speaks about Harry's relationship with King Charles. The man the world recognizes as his father, but the man Harry has never been entirely sure he belonged to. From the outside, it looked like a simple enough story. Charles, the reserved prince turned king, raising his two boys after Diana's death. But inside, behind closed doors, the truth was far more complicated. Their relationship was never warm, never effortless. And for Harry, that distance carried a sting that went beyond fatherly aloofness. It carried the weight of suspicion. Because how do you bond with a man if deep down, you fear you may not share his blood? Let's rewind to Harry's childhood. Charles was never known for being demonstrative. He wasn't the kind of father who got down on the floor to play with toy cars or wrapped his arms around his boys at every turn. His love was subtle, restrained, shaped by centuries of royal expectation. For William, that distance was softened by purpose. He was the heir, the chosen one, the future king. But for Harry, that distance magnified the whispers. Every time Charles failed to show affection, it felt less like personality and more like proof. Meghan describes the way Harry would talk about his father. Admiration, yes. Frustration, always. A sense that Charles cared, but didn't know how to show it. And in that void, Harry's doubts festered. Was Charles cold because of who he was? Or was he cold because Harry wasn't truly his? Now, let's pause for a moment. Imagine growing up under those circumstances. Every child craves approval. Every son longs for a father's validation. But what if every cold glance, every awkward hug, felt like evidence that you weren't wanted, that you weren't really his? How would that shape you? And then there were the public moments, the carefully staged photo ops. Charles walking with William, hand gently placed on his shoulder, William always at his side. Harry trailing just a step behind, smiling for the cameras, but never quite in the frame of closeness. The optics mattered, and optics, in this case, became fuel for the whispers. But here's where the story gets more painful, because it wasn't always coldness. There were moments, brief, fleeting moments, where Charles did show warmth. A laugh shared, a hand on the back, a moment of pride in Harry's military service. And those moments cut even deeper, because they reminded Harry of what could have been. They gave him hope. But hope mixed with doubt is torture. Because every time Charles showed love, Harry wondered, was it real? Was it unconditional? Or was it duty? Meghan recalls one of the most heartbreaking things Harry ever told her. Late one night, after yet another tabloid headline about Hewitt, he confessed, "Sometimes I think he loves me because he has to, not because I'm his." Imagine carrying that thought in your heart about the man who raised you. And here's where Meghan's revelation twists the knife even further. Because Charles himself was haunted by whispers. The rumors about Harry's paternity didn't just hurt Harry, they hurt Charles too. Behind his stiff exterior, he lived with the humiliation of a world questioning whether his son was truly his. Meghan suggests that this shame may have shaped Charles's distance. Not because he didn't care for Harry, but because every glance reminded him of the doubt he couldn't silence. Now think about the irony. Both father and son, trapped in the same torment. Harry, doubting whether Charles loved him. Charles, doubting whether the world believed Harry was his. Both wounded, both silent, both suffering. And then came the cruelest twist of all. Because the man Harry looked most like, the man who made the whispers impossible to ignore, was never Charles. It was James Hewitt, the riding instructor whose affair with Diana is burned into the history books. Every photo comparison drew lines between Harry and Hewitt, never between Harry and Charles. And every time those comparisons resurfaced, it drove the wedge between father and son even deeper. Let me ask you directly. How do you build trust with a man when every headline in the world tells you he might not be your father? How do you embrace him without wondering if he secretly wonders too? Meghan's confession lays bare a cruel truth. Charles and Harry's relationship was built on silence, not resolution. Neither dared to speak the words. Neither dared to confront the question. And in that silence, love was poisoned by doubt. But Meghan also points to something even darker. Because while Charles may have been distant, there were moments when Harry saw flashes of pain in his father's eyes. Pain that suggested Charles himself feared the truth. Pain that suggested the whispers haunted him just as much as they haunted Harry. And that fear, that unspoken fear, cast a shadow over their every interaction. So what does that make Charles? A father? A stranger? Both. Meghan leaves us with the haunting suggestion that Harry himself may never know. Because love, in their case, was tangled in a question mark too dangerous to answer. And yet, the story doesn't end there. Because there was another man in Diana's life. A man whose presence, whose very existence, turned the whispers from cruel gossip into a narrative the world couldn't ignore. His name was James Hewitt. What if your very existence was tied to another man's name? A man you never chose, a man you never invited into your life, yet a man the world insists on comparing you to. For Prince Harry, that man is James Hewitt. And no matter how many times the facts have been laid out, no matter how often the timelines have been explained, the Hewitt factor refuses to die. Meghan Markle says this shadow is one of the most destructive forces in Harry's life. Because it doesn't just live in the tabloids, it lives in him. Let's start with the obvious. James Hewitt was Princess Diana's former lover. Their affair, widely reported in the 1990s, was both romantic and scandalous. He was her riding instructor, her confidant, her escape from the coldness of royal life. The tabloids feasted on it. Books were written. Interviews were given. Hewitt himself admitted to the affair after Diana's death. And ever since, his name has been tied to Harry's in the cruelest way possible. Think about the timeline for a moment. Harry was born in 1984. Diana's relationship with Hewitt didn't begin until 1986. By the calendar alone, it's impossible for Hewitt to be Harry's biological father. Even Hewitt himself has confirmed this fact repeatedly. And yet, the rumors live on. Why? Because people don't remember dates. They remember faces. And Harry's face, with its bright ginger hair and striking resemblance to Hewitt, became a visual confirmation for those who wanted scandal more than truth. Now imagine being Harry. Imagine growing up with the knowledge that your mother's most infamous affair was forever tied to you. Imagine knowing that every time someone said, James Hewitt, they were really looking at your face. How do you carry that? How do you separate yourself from a man you never even chose to know? Meghan recalls how deeply this eats at Harry. Because it isn't just about resemblance. It's about betrayal. Betrayal of his mother, betrayal of his father, betrayal of himself. Every time Hewitt's name comes up, Harry is forced to relive the pain of Diana's struggles, the humiliation of Charles's distance, and the cruel possibility that he is the product of a scandal rather than a marriage. But here's where it gets darker. Because Meghan suggests that the palace itself allowed the Hewitt rumor to thrive. How? By refusing to shut it down. By never clarifying the timeline. By never defending Harry outright. Never complain, never explain. It was their mantra. But in this case, their silence gave the rumor oxygen. And every year that passed without a denial turned suspicion into certainty in the minds of millions. Ask yourself this. Why wouldn't they defend him? Why wouldn't the palace protect Harry from the pain of being branded as Hewitt's son? Was it negligence? Was it cruelty? Or was it a quiet calculation that Harry's suffering was a price worth paying to preserve the monarchy's veil of mystery? Because mystery, after all, sells. Scandal keeps the monarchy in the headlines. And Harry, like it or not, became their most scandalous figure. Now let's shift focus to Diana, because Meghan points out that even Diana herself struggled with the rumors. She knew what the world was saying. She knew her affair with Hewitt would cast a permanent shadow over Harry, and she feared for him. In letters, in conversations, she expressed her torment, that her own mistakes would be used against her son for the rest of his life. Can you imagine that? A mother, already broken by the pressures of royalty, realizing that her attempt at finding love outside the marriage would leave her son carrying a burden forever. And then came the cruelest irony. For all the talk about resemblance, for all the endless comparisons to Hewitt, Harry inherited so much from Diana. Her warmth, her mischief, her rebellion, her compassion. Those traits were his true inheritance. Yet the world ignored them, because scandal sells better than truth. Meghan says Harry often reflects on this, that the world sees Hewitt in his face but refuses to see Diana in his heart. And that rejection, that refusal to recognize who he really is, destroys him. But let's talk about Hewitt himself. Over the years, he has been hounded by reporters, asked the same question again and again. Are you Harry's father? Every time, he has denied it. Every time, he has explained the timeline. And yet, the question never dies. Why? Because people don't want the truth. They want the story. And the story of Harry being Hewitt's son is juicier than the story of him being Charles's. That's the tragedy. Harry can't escape the Hewitt factor because it has become more than gossip. It has become folklore. A myth passed down, whispered in pubs, written in tabloids, splashed across the internet. A myth so powerful that facts don't matter. And for Harry, that's unbearable. Because how do you fight a myth? Now think about this in terms of identity. Your identity is supposed to be yours. But for Harry, it has always been hijacked. Taken by tabloids. Twisted by rumor. Mocked by comedians. Every time someone compares him to Hewitt, they aren't just questioning his paternity. They're questioning his very existence. And that kind of attack doesn't fade. It festers. Meghan recalls moments when Harry broke down, overwhelmed by it all. He'd say things like, I can't escape him. Even when I look in the mirror, I see their comparisons. Imagine the torment of looking at your own reflection and seeing not yourself, but the rumors of another man. And yet, here's the cruel paradox. The Hewitt factor isn't going away. Not now. Not ever. Because the more Harry tries to live his life, the more the rumor follows him. Every book, every documentary, every interview, it always circles back to Hewitt. And Meghan knows this, which is why she says the pain destroys him every day. Because it isn't just the past. It's the present. It's his future. It's his children. Archie and Lilibet will grow up in a world where their father's identity is still questioned. And here's the cliffhanger. Meghan hints that even Diana herself left behind words, secret writings, that touch on this fear. Writings that reveal just how deeply the Hewitt rumor tormented her and how desperately she wanted to shield Harry from it. But when Meghan uncovered those words, she realized something chilling. The secret wasn't buried. It was waiting. And Diana's voice, even from beyond the grave, had more to reveal. What if the truth you've been searching for was hidden not in DNA, not in palace statements, but in the private words of the mother you lost too soon? What if the one person who could answer your deepest fears had already left clues behind, scattered across pages no one was ever meant to read? That's where Meghan Markle takes us next, into the shadowed corners of Princess Diana's secret writings. For Harry, Diana has always been both a beacon and a wound. The beacon, her compassion, her warmth, her willingness to rebel against the cold traditions of the monarchy. The wound, her tragic death, her absence, the void no one else could ever fill. But in Meghan's telling, Diana also left behind something else, a trail of words, notes, and private reflections that reveal how much she feared the very rumors that would haunt her son for life. Imagine this. A mother, already suffocated by the cruelty of the press and the coldness of her marriage, sitting alone late at night with a pen in her hand. She writes letters. She scribbles diary entries. She leaves confessions for trusted friends. And in those writings, she pours out her pain, not just for herself, but for her boys. Especially Harry. Because Diana knew. She knew the world whispered. She knew the resemblance to James Hewitt would become a weapon. She knew her own mistakes, Her desperate grasp for love outside a loveless marriage would one day be turned against her child, and she carried that guilt like a stone in her chest. Meghan says reading Diana's words was like stepping into her torment. Diana wrote of her fear that Harry would be mocked, that his identity would be questioned. She worried that the press would crucify him the way they crucified her. And most haunting of all, she admitted that the rumor about Hewitt might become impossible to silence. Not because it was true, but because it was powerful. Because once a lie takes root, it grows like ivy, wrapping itself around the truth until people can't tell the difference. Now pause for a moment. Imagine being Harry, years later, hearing from Meghan about these writings. Imagine realizing your mother predicted your torment, that she saw it coming, that she feared it, that she wanted to protect you but couldn't. How do you carry that? Does it comfort you, knowing she understood? Or does it crush you, knowing she expected it? Meghan recalls the weight of it. She describes Harry sitting silently after reading parts of Diana's reflections. Not angry, not even shocked, just broken. Because in that moment, the whispers weren't just rumors. They were prophecy. His mother had seen them coming, and now he was living them. But here's the twist. Diana's writings weren't just about fear. They were about love. Over and over, she affirmed how much she adored Harry, how much she valued his spirit, his kindness, his laughter. She called him her wild one, her joy, the son who carried her heart. And that love, Meghan says, became both Harry's salvation and his torment. Because every time he doubted himself, every time he questioned his place in the family, he would hear Diana's voice in his head reminding him that he was hers. But was that enough? Was being hers enough to silence the question of whether he was Charles's? Let me ask you directly, would it be enough for you? If the world doubted who your father was, but your mother's love was unquestionable, could that sustain you? Or would the doubt still eat you alive? And here's where the story gets even more chilling. Because some of Diana's writings hinted at her awareness of the palace's silence. She knew they would never defend Harry. She knew they would let the rumor swirl, because that's how the monarchy survives. Through silence, through mystery, through letting scandal distract the public while the institution endures. And she hated it. She hated that her son would grow up in that system. Meghan says this realization lit a fire in her. Because reading Diana's pain, seeing how accurately she predicted Harry's torment, made Meghan determined not to repeat history. Diana was silenced. Meghan would not be. Diana's whispers stayed in journals. Meghan's whispers became confessions. And in that decision, to speak where Diana could not, Meghan felt she was honoring Harry's mother. But let's dig deeper. Diana's writings also revealed something unexpected. She hinted at conversations, private exchanges, where the subject of Harry's resemblance was brought up to her face. People joked. People speculated. Even people within her circle. Imagine the cruelty of that. Being a mother, hearing others question your child's paternity. Diana, in her notes, expressed fury, but also fear. Fear that one day Harry would hear it too. And he did. Now think about this. Diana, the woman known for her vulnerability, for her openness, had her own secrets. And those secrets, those confessions, weren't meant for the public. Yet here they were, decades later, shaping the way Meghan understood Harry's torment. And Meghan knew the truth. If Diana had been alive, she might have found a way to shield Harry. But in her absence, the whispers only grew. So where does that leave Harry? With the words of a mother who loved him fiercely, but who couldn't stop the storm that followed him. With the knowledge that his pain was both predicted and inevitable. And with a choice, continue to suffer in silence, or break the cycle by speaking the words Diana never could. And that's where Meghan steps in. She saw those writings as both a warning and a mandate. A warning of how deep the pain could go. A mandate to never let history repeat itself. And so she chose to speak, to confess, to reveal. But once Meghan stepped into Diana's shadow, she realized something even darker. Because the whispers weren't just about Harry's identity. They were about the institution itself. And Diana's writings hinted at that too. She feared that the monarchy would use Harry, not protect him. That he would be sacrificed for the survival of the crown. And Meghan began to see that prophecy unfolding in real time. So here's the cliffhanger. Meghan says Diana's words convinced her that silence is deadly. That to stay quiet is to let the whispers destroy you. And that's why Meghan confessed. I can't hide it anymore. It destroys him every day. But if Meghan was determined to speak, the press was even more determined to listen. And what came next wasn't just whispers in the palace. It was a full-blown media frenzy that dragged Harry's pain into the spotlight all over again. What happens when a private torment becomes public property? What happens when whispers, once confined to palace walls and late-night gossip, explode into screaming headlines on every newsstand in the world? That's exactly what Harry faced when the media frenzy over his identity and paternity rumors hit full force. If the whispers were a shadow, the tabloids turned them into a floodlight, merciless, blinding, and impossible to escape. The British tabloids had always been ruthless. They tore into Diana while she was alive, and they didn't stop after her death. Harry, from the moment he could walk, was fair game. His every stumble, every cheeky grin, every rebellious act was turned into copy. But nothing was as lucrative as the rumor about his paternity. James Hewitt's name was a goldmine. Pair his photo with Harry's, add a sensational headline, and sales skyrocketed. Now picture being Harry in his teens and 20s, trying to carve out your own identity. You're already the spare, living under the constant comparison to your brother, the heir. And then, every time you pick up a paper or walk past a newsstand, you see yourself reduced to one question. Who's your real father? Imagine that headline following you from school to the army to every pub in London. Imagine strangers looking at your face, smirking, and whispering as if they know a truth you don't. That's not just gossip. That's psychological warfare. And the press didn't just report it, they exploited it. Tabloids ran side-by-side comparisons of Harry and Hewitt. Documentaries hinted at the possibility. Columnists cracked jokes about ginger hair being the smoking gun. Even foreign outlets, far removed from the palace, recycled the same cruel story. And every time it resurfaced, the wound inside Harry deepened. Let's pause here. Ask yourself, how would you feel if millions of people debated your very bloodline as if it were a sport? Would you shrug it off? Would you laugh with them? Or would you, like Harry, carry that pain silently, letting it eat at your sense of self until you couldn't ignore it anymore? Meghan recalls seeing Harry's reaction to these stories. He would tense up. His jaw would lock. He'd go silent, retreating into himself. To the world, he was the party prince, the rebellious royal always up for mischief. But behind closed doors, those headlines destroyed him. Meghan says he once muttered, "I don't even know who I'm supposed to be anymore." That's the kind of identity crisis no man should endure, let alone under the glare of a global spotlight. And here's the bitter irony. The media loved Harry. They depended on him. He sold papers. His scandals, his mistakes, his jokes, his romances were always front-page gold. But the very thing that made him profitable also destroyed him. He was their product and their prey at the same time. Think about the way the media framed him versus William. William was always the dutiful heir. Harry was the reckless spare. William was stability. Harry was chaos. And fueling that narrative was the paternity rumor. Because what better way to explain Harry's rebellious streak than by suggesting he didn't even belong? It was the cruelest storytelling trick, and it worked. Readers bought it. Viewers ate it up. And Harry paid the price. Now let's talk about humor. Because comedians, talk show hosts, and late-night television weren't innocent in this frenzy. They picked up the rumor and turned it into punchlines. Jokes about ginger hair. Jokes about Hewitt. Jokes about Harry being the royal redhead bastard. Imagine being reduced to a punchline on global television. Imagine millions laughing at your pain. That's not just humiliation, it's dehumanization. Meghan says this is what broke her heart most. Not the headlines, not the comparisons, but the way people laughed. Because laughter makes a lie feel true. Laughter makes cruelty feel acceptable. And once the world starts laughing at you, how do you fight back? But the frenzy didn't stop at jokes. It became dangerous. Paparazzi followed Harry relentlessly, hoping to capture a reaction, a slip, a meltdown. They wanted proof that the rumor had gotten to him. They wanted the photo of Harry lashing out, crying, or cracking under pressure. Because in the tabloid world, pain sells. And Harry's pain was priceless. And here's the cruelest twist. The more Harry rebelled, the parties, the Vegas scandal, the Nazi costume, the more the press used it as evidence. They spun his mistakes into proof that he wasn't truly royal, that he was different. They weren't just reporting. They were building a narrative. and Harry was trapped inside it. Let me ask you, how do you fight something like that? If you ignore it, it grows. If you confront it, you feed it. And if you break down, they win. It's a no-win game. And Harry was the player, like it or not. Now picture Meghan stepping into this chaos. She sees her husband consumed by it. She sees the headlines, the jokes, the paparazzi hounding him. And she realizes something terrifying. If this is what the press did to Harry, what will they do to Archie? To Lilibet? Meghan's maternal instinct kicked in. She knew silence wouldn't protect them. Diana had been silent, and look where it got her. Meghan chose another path. But here's where the story gets even darker. Because the media frenzy wasn't just external. Meghan and Harry began to suspect it was being fed from the inside. Leaks, tips, carefully timed stories. Was the palace itself feeding the press? Was Harry's torment being used as a distraction from other scandals? Meghan hints at this possibility, and if true, it means Harry wasn't just the victim of the press. He was a pawn of the monarchy itself, and that realization pushed him to the edge. Because when your pain becomes someone else's strategy, you stop being a son, a husband, a man. You become a weapon, a shield, a tool. And Harry couldn't live like that anymore. So here's the cliffhanger. Meghan says the frenzy reached such a pitch that Harry finally broke. One night, alone with her, he whispered the words she'll never forget. I don't think I belong anywhere. What if every whisper, every headline, every cruel comparison finally piled up so high that you couldn't carry it anymore? What if years of torment, humiliation, and doubt finally cracked you open in a single moment of surrender? That's what Meghan Markle describes when she reveals the night Harry reached his breaking point. Harry had always been resilient, or at least that's what the world believed. The cheeky grin, the wild nights out, the image of a carefree prince who could laugh at himself while William carried the weight of the crown. But Meghan says that image was just armor. Behind it was a man haunted by questions too heavy for anyone to bear. Questions about his father. Questions about his identity. Questions about whether his very existence was a mistake. And one night, the armor shattered. Picture it, Harry and Meghan alone, away from the flashing cameras, away from the palace walls, just two people in the quiet of their private world. Meghan notices something is different. Harry is quiet. Not the thoughtful kind of quiet, but the hollow kind. His shoulders slump. His eyes look distant. And then, in a voice that doesn't sound like his, he says, "What if I don't belong to him?" Not, "What if the rumors are true?" Not, "What if the press is right?" But something deeper, rawer. The fear that the man he called dad his whole life was a stranger. The fear that he didn't belong. Not to Charles, not to the monarchy, not to anyone. Now pause for a moment. Let me ask you. How would you react if the person you loved most in the world looked at you and confessed something like that? Would you reassure them? Would you argue with them? Or would you, like Meghan, feel your heart break because you realize nothing you say will erase the wound that's been carved into them since childhood? Meghan describes that night as the first time Harry truly opened the door to his torment. He told her about schoolyard jeers, about staff whispers, about headlines that never stopped. He told her about looking in the mirror and wondering if his reflection even belonged to the man he was told was his father. He told her about the silence of the palace, the refusal to defend him, the suffocating loneliness of carrying a question no one dared to answer. And Meghan saw it all laid bare. The boy who lost his mother too soon, the teenager mocked for his mistakes, the man the world turned into a caricature. Beneath it all was just Harry, broken and tired. This was his breaking point. He admitted he was exhausted. Exhausted from being compared. Exhausted from being doubted. Exhausted from being laughed at. He confessed that sometimes, late at night, he wondered if the world would be better off if he simply disappeared. Meghan says those words chilled her to the bone. Because for the first time, she realized this wasn't just pain. It was despair. Now think about that. Prince Harry, the man born into castles, privilege, and unimaginable wealth, confessing that he felt worthless. That's the power of rumor. That's the destruction of identity. Strip away the titles and the luxury, and you're left with a man wondering if he even has the right to exist in his own family. And here's the twist. Meghan reveals that Harry's breaking point wasn't just about himself. It was about his children. He told her, "I don't want Archie to grow up like this. I don't want him to feel what I've felt." That's when Meghan knew the whispers weren't just Harry's burden. They were a generational curse. And if they didn't break it, Archie and Lilibet would inherit it. But here's where it gets even darker. Because Harry's breaking point didn't come in a vacuum. Meghan hints that palace insiders, aware of Harry's pain, deliberately pushed it further. They fed stories to the press. They allowed the rumors to circulate. They let the fire burn, knowing Harry was the one being consumed by it. And when Harry realized this, when he saw that the family he was trying to belong to might have been complicit in his suffering, something inside him snapped. That's when Meghan says Harry made his most shocking confession. He admitted he had considered walking away from it all long before Meghan entered his life. Not just walking away from the palace, but from life itself. He told her he had nights where he stared into the darkness and wondered what the point was. Because if he wasn't Charles's son, if he didn't belong, then who was he? Let that sink in. The boy who walked behind his mother's coffin, the man the world called a prince, admitting that he sometimes questioned whether his life had value at all. That's not just a breaking point. That's a cry for help. And Meghan's role in that moment was crucial. She didn't just comfort him. She reminded him that his worth wasn't in his bloodline. It wasn't in his title. It wasn't in whether or not Charles was his father. His worth was in his humanity, in his love, in the family they were building together. But even as she said it, Meghan knew the torment wasn't gone. Words couldn't erase decades of doubt. They could only hold back the darkness, for now. And so Harry's breaking point became a turning point. He realized he couldn't survive in silence anymore. He couldn't pretend the whispers didn't matter. He couldn't bury the pain the way he always had. Something had to change. But change wouldn't come easily. Because Harry's breaking point was just the beginning of a bigger war. One not just against rumor, but against the very monarchy itself. What if the whispers weren't just about Harry, but about the monarchy itself? What if the very institution that raised him wasn't terrified of scandal, but terrified of what the truth might mean for its survival? That's the darker layer Meghan Markle points to when she speaks about the paternity rumors. Because behind every headline mocking Harry's ginger hair, or every tabloid photo comparing him to James Hewitt, there was a deeper fear lurking in the palace, that one rumor could bring the monarchy to its knees. Let's be honest, monarchies live and die on bloodlines. Titles, castles, crowns, they mean nothing without lineage. The entire legitimacy of the royal family rests on one fragile premise, that the people wearing the crowns are bound by blood to the family before them. Break that chain, and the monarchy collapses. Now put yourself in the shoes of the palace. The rumor that Harry might not be Charles's biological son isn't just cruel gossip. It's existential. It doesn't just wound Harry. It threatens the very foundation of the crown. If Harry were proven not to be Charles's, what happens to the line of succession? What happens to William's claim? What happens to the monarchy's image of stability? The stakes aren't personal. They're national. That's why the palace has always been silent. Never complain, never explain. On the surface, it looks like dignity. But in reality, it's strategy. Because to even acknowledge the rumor is to give it legitimacy. And legitimacy is lethal. Better to let Harry suffer in silence than to risk pulling the thread that could unravel the whole crown. Meghan describes this fear as a ghost that haunts every royal corridor. Behind the stiff smiles and polite ceremonies, insiders know the truth. Harry's identity has always been the monarchy's weak spot. And instead of protecting him, they exploited him. They allowed the press to run with the rumor, knowing Harry's pain would distract the world from other scandals. Affairs, finances, power struggles. Whenever the institution needed cover, the Hewitt story could be conveniently revived. Harry wasn't just a victim. He was a shield. Think about the cruelty of that. The palace didn't just tolerate Harry's suffering. They weaponized it. And Harry knew it. Meghan says this realization crushed him, that the family he desperately wanted to belong to had turned his torment into strategy. Now ask yourself, how do you live with that? How do you stand beside your father at public events, smile for cameras, wave to crowds, when deep down you suspect he let the world laugh at you to protect himself? How do you trust an institution that would rather let you bleed than risk its crown? And here's where the monarchy's fear grows darker. Because the whispers don't just question Harry's identity. They question the stability of the crown itself. If one prince's bloodline is in doubt, who's next? How many skeletons are rattling in the Windsor closet? Monarchies thrive on illusion, on the idea that they are above ordinary scandal. But once the illusion cracks, the whole structure trembles. That's why the institution fears Harry's truth more than any other scandal. Infidelity? They can survive that. Financial corruption? They've survived worse. But a prince with questionable paternity? That's dynamite. That calls into question the very legitimacy of the royal family. That is the one rumor they can never allow to be proven or disproven. And so the silence continues. The denials never come. The truth is never pursued. Because in the palace's calculation, Harry's pain is a small price to pay for the monarchy's survival. But Meghan doesn't see it that way. She sees the man she loves destroyed by doubt, destroyed by whispers, destroyed by the silence of an institution that claims to protect its own. She sees a husband and father broken by the very family that should have defended him, and she refuses to accept it. Now here's the irony. The monarchy's fear, their silence, was supposed to protect them. But in the end, it may have doomed them. Because Meghan's confession, that she can't hide it anymore, has reignited the very question the palace tried so hard to bury. And once the truth is out in the open, silence is no longer protection. Silence is guilt. But here's the cliffhanger. Meghan says that when she spoke these words, when she revealed just how much the whispers destroy Harry, the palace reacted immediately. Not with comfort, not with defense, but with something far colder. They moved to silence her. And what Meghan describes next isn't just a family matter. It's a war. A war between a woman who refused to let her husband suffer in silence and an institution that would rather bury the truth than face it.